Hi, Bother Brigade. Here's what's bothering me today. It's nearly a week into May, and only now we're doing the good news from April video. So it's been like a long month and a very frustrating month. There's been a lot happening at work and in my personal life. So yeah, we haven't managed to do, uploads every day, but ultimately that's okay. But this is one that I've actually been wanting to make for like 2 weeks at this point, because as much as April was, a tough month for a lot of people, and looking around now, there's some pretty terrible news coming out of May, but there's good to be found there. And sure, we're going to talk about some stories that probably everyone remembers, but also hopefully a lot of good news stories that people haven't heard, and hopefully it's going to uplift a lot of people. So instead of being bothered by all the injustice, let's be bothered about all the good news we didn't hear about over the course of April. So for starters, right off the bat, and it wasn't an April Fool's Day joke, Pope Francis apologizes to Indigenous delegates for deplorable abuses at residential schools. Yeah, the Indigenous First Nations in what we call Canada actually got a formal apology from the Pope. Now, this still isn't, full financial compensation. We've talked about this before and why the Catholic Church has been very cagey about this. And even with some of the termed language of the Pope's apology, it's like, I'm very sorry. Hopefully you can forgive me and some other bishops. There's still some issues, but it is still an enormously positive step in the right direction. And also an admittance, to some extent anyway, of gross negligence and wrongdoing. So it's a significant step. And if you're new here and you haven't heard too much about Canada's residential schools and the whole issue with the Catholic Church tied into that, I'll see if I can link some videos on the subject down below, and just also type up like residential schools onto, my channel search function. You should be able to find it. It's a whole brutal history here in this country, and the Catholic Church has always been very reticent about apologizing for the majority role they played in what was effectively a cultural and ethnic genocide of Indigenous people in Canada. So this is, again, long overdue, but a positive step in the right direction. Here's to actual further financial compensation and working towards Indigenous communities and beginning the long process of healing. And then the second big news story that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, Amazon workers on Staten Island successfully voted to form a union. Chris Smalls, the leader of the Amazon labor union, he's basically a small celebrity at this point. He was actually originally fired by Amazon, and then he decided to start unionizing, or driving towards unionizing, the Amazon warehouse on Staten Island, and he ended up succeeding along with all the people who were putting in the work at that Amazon warehouse, and this is the result. And it's the first of its kind. It's literally a David v. Goliath kind of situation. So congrats to him and the rest of the workers at Amazon for finally unionizing, and here's to hopefully many more successes down the road. But speaking of someone who's not enjoyed a lot of success recently, we get to talk about good old Donald Trump for a hot second. Trump held in contempt, fined $10,000 a day until he complies with probe. Yeah, Donald Trump has apparently been found in contempt for his terrible thing of keeping private and sensitive top secret documents at the Mar-a-Lago Hotel in Florida. And sure, he's rich, but $10,000 a day adds up really quick, especially if you don't want to actually kind of do what they're asking, because that maybe would paint you in a negative light. So you love to see the fine, but also on that day, Trump had some other very unfortunate developments with other things. So his being found in contempt is related to the fact that there's still an ongoing investigation by the Department of Justice into those files at Mar-a-Lago. And then the other thing that happened that day was the revelation that the case investigation into the Trump Organization itself is apparently still ongoing, whereas most people thought it actually kind of just fizzled out and died. Now, how likely is it, the prosecutor could just be saying, oh yeah, no, it's totally still ongoing. We aren't entirely sure. But allegedly it's still ongoing. So, yeah, Trump had a really bad day in April. And in the wake of that, he has to pay $10,000 a day until he actually complies and hands over documents. So, I mean, kind of a win. And while I'm not sure if it can technically be constituted a win just yet, there was a pretty significant development about mid-April where apparently over 14,000 Etsy sellers went on strike to protest increased transaction fees. Because yeah, a lot of people are feeling the financial pinch these days, and apparently Etsy said, well, you know what, we still need to increase the fees because our shareholders just aren't making as much money as they'd like to. And the result was a bunch of like hobbyists on Etsy said, no thank you, we're going on strike. So if you had some issues with Etsy recently, that may have been why, but also show solidarity with them. I don't know if that means maybe putting off your shopping for a while, or now if the strike's over, actually support those who went on strike because, you know, that was probably a loss to their income, and, you know, just support good independent creators, right? However, there's someone we shouldn't support for a myriad of reasons, and that is the terrible TERF known as J.K. Rowling. But there is good news in terms of her not getting more money to be awful and terrible to trans people. It's official, Warner Bros. Has slammed the brakes on J.K. Rowling's Fantastic Beasts franchise. If you're a fan, I'm sure you're probably a little sad, but ultimately this is good news considering all the scandals that have been involved with that franchise, and then also the terrible TERF herself. So, you know, it's kind of good that this has died on the cutting room floor, in my opinion. I know it's not going to change the world or anything, but it's a little less money for the terrible TERF to throw around to terrible bigoted people, so I count that as a win. Meanwhile, the people who aren't winning lately are crypto bros. An NFT of Jack Dorsey's first ever tweet, which sold for $2.9 million last year, has been up for sale since last week and has failed to garner a bid over $1,000. You absolutely unabashedly love to see it. Those who have been here a while know we did at least one video explaining why NFTs are a scam and basically just a Ponzi scheme. So, you know, thankfully people have become aware of the terrible grift that are NFTs. But it's kind of really refreshing to see these people who, you know, they thought, oh, you know, I can make money. I'm just going to get in. I'm going to sell my house, put the mortgage on this terrible, awful, shitty piece of virtual art. And all of a sudden, they can't get anyone to buy what they spent a ton of money buying. Like, I'm not kidding. The market everywhere is down. Significantly so, I might add. Crypto winter, NFTs down 92%, OpenSea installs down 94%, Vive down 99%, crypto apps down 64%. NFTs well and truly were this generation's tulip mania. It's so wild to have seen. Also, for the record, NFTs are absolutely horrendous for the environment. Like, absolutely terrible, awful garbage. So thank God that it seems to have cooled down in that regard. Still doesn't deal with the problem of mining and crypto in general, but that's a subject for another time. Because we're all here for good news, right? And also to, you know, point and laugh at crypto bros and Donald Trump a little bit. And while there's been lots of good news that people have no doubt heard about with Starbucks stores unionizing all across the American United States, basically, but also a little bit here in Canada, the general attention being paid to just that is kind of concerning when we also have other places that are unionizing. We've touched on it before, I think in last month's version of this episode, but we have some good news from some Verizon stores. We won 11-1. The Everett and Linwood stores are now unionized. Yep, at least 2 Verizon wireless stores ended up unionizing. So this isn't just about Starbucks, right? It isn't just about the big, you know, successful push at the Amazon warehouse on Staten Island. There's clearly something bigger going on here, and we should absolutely celebrate it and celebrate the wins that are happening, whether they're at Starbucks, Verizon, at the REI co-op. Like, there are wins happening everywhere. And speaking of wins, I want to talk a little bit about a story that didn't really get a whole lot of traction up here in Canada, but it is very important constitutionally speaking. On April 14th, the Supreme Court of Canada rejected the province of Nova Scotia's request to have the court hear an appeal of the recent Nova Scotia Court of Appeal decision that found the province has been systematically discriminating against people with disabilities for decades. A decade-long story, grossly oversimplified and summed up. This was basically Nova Scotia saying, no, we totally weren't being terrible, awful, shitty, and discriminatory towards disabled people in terms of services, housing, payments, etc. And please don't, challenge us on this subject. But it was challenged, and the Supreme Court said, no, they have a point. And then when the government of Nova Scotia tried to appeal, saying, no, come on, like, this isn't what it looks like. Totally, trust me, believe me. The Supreme Court said, we're not hearing the excuses. So, really good, positive win for disabled people in Canada, because it at least set the precedent now that the Supreme Court is not going to hear terrible, awful stuff that was already basically proven in a lower court. Now, this doesn't mean that the whole situation is going to be fixed overnight, but it does mean that, they've kind of run as far as they can up the ladder. Nova Scotia has to change things, admit wrongdoing, likely have to pay some kind of lawsuit or settlement fee with those who created the lawsuit in the first place. Like, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff on the back end now, but generally speaking, and from a constitutional standpoint, disabled people in Canada got a win in mid-April. But returning to the States for a hot second, I know we talked about before the various anti-LGBTQ plus bills going on, like Texas, Idaho, all the nightmare red states, right? And yeah, those passed, and those are terrible, and they were setting up for what we're seeing now with Roe v. Wade and all this other terribleness and the rescinding of rights for women, gay people, just the LGBTQ community in general. Like, yeah, it's all very terrible, right? However, there have been some wins that not a lot of people knew about or talked about, and that changes right now. With anti-trans laws like in Texas, Florida, and Alabama, it's important to note legislative sessions are closing across the country, and we have so many victories. A thread. Defeated Florida HO 211, criminal penalty for youth transition. MS House Bill 2728, criminal penalty for youth transition. Defeated MS Senate Bill 2356, ban on name/gender change for minors. MS SB 2679, require teachers to out trans students. Virginia SB 20 would reverse trans protections in schools. Virginia House Bill 1126, trans restroom ban. Virginia Senate Bill 766, trans sports ban. Indiana Senate Bill 0034, criminal youth transition ban. Indiana Senate Bill 0402, protected anti-trans parents. Indiana House Bill 1041, a sports ban. It was vetoed. South Dakota House Bill 1005, a bathroom/sleeping room ban. Wyoming SF 0051, a trans sports ban. Utah House Bill 0127, a ban on gender-affirming care for trans youth. West Virginia House Bill 2171, criminal youth transition ban. And West Virginia House Bill 4016, a classroom teaching ban. These are just some of the many victories simply from states closing out their legislative sessions and not bringing them up to vote. Many more states will close their sessions soon as well, and many bills have been defeated in session. Don't lose hope. We win more than we lose. Which, again, I know that, you're inclined to laugh likely about that, given what's happened recently with Roe v. Wade, and then people talking about overturning Obergefell. Like, yeah, it's a problem. Do not get me wrong. Do not misinterpret me here. I'm not saying everything is all sunshine and roses. We are all well aware on this channel of how objectively shit the universe is at this point in time. But there are still very clear and significant victories happening where we are seeing, terrible, awful stuff. Like you saw, attempted trans bans and sports bans and you can't talk about it all. Like all this terrible authoritarian nightmare ghoul shit, right? It's being defeated in legislatures and in some cases even being vetoed. So yeah, we are losing some here and there. Like I know there's another terrible one that we talked about recently that was passed in Utah, but there's also a bunch that are being proposed and being defeated. And people aren't hearing about that when I think they should, because sure, the fight goes on and it's really dark and dire right now, but that's why I think it's all the more important, if not crucial, to talk about these wins that have been happening that people haven't been hearing about. Which I guess that brings us to our next story. There's legislation in California to shorten the work week from 40 hours to 32 hours without a reduction in pay, which would be the most transformative labor legislation in our generation, and it should be bigger news, but it barely made a headline. Now, yeah, has this passed yet? I'm not sure. It seemed kind of late in the game. And, it may not even be that great when you look at the nitty gritty of it, but still, the fact that California, one of the largest states in the union, where I think like aren't like 1 in 10 Americans from California or something like that? Like there's a ton of people in that state. And so the fact that they are considering this, even if only somewhat seriously, is big news. It's moving that Overton window further left, further towards the moral arc of the universe, which does tend to bend progressive, right? So a good development that, again, I had to hear about from a tweet. And like, sure, for me, the biggest problem with this is, oh, wow, yay, you're working less hours, but still getting the same pay. But the rate of pay in America is so low, people are really squeezed. Like the living wage needs to be increased, right? So that should be something else to consider, because it's like, yeah, I'm making the same amount of money on one less day, but that still means that's another day that I'm basically going to have to work at a second job to make ends meet, because that's the nightmare in America right now, right? But again, the fact that this is even being considered, really big news. It's a shame it wasn't reported on by way more places. However, something that everyone learned about in late April, Infowars files for bankruptcy protection as founder Alex Jones faces defamation lawsuits.
I don't understand why people would be so upset if I said that the Sandy Hook shooting was a hoax and that they're actually hiding their kids and they're paid state actors, all while they're dealing with incredible grief. I don't understand how I'm the bad guy in this situation.
Or something to that effect is something I'm sure Alex Jones said at some point. Now, one thing about bankruptcy protection is that it basically puts a pause on like litigation and payment so that you can restructure and reorganize. So it's not exactly like it means the end of Infowars, but it's still, you know, a good little metaphorical clobbering of Alex Jones and some of the worst, most detestable acts he ever committed in his long and terrible run as a gremlin on the internet. So fingers crossed he and Infowars continue to suffer. They are objectively terrible people, misinforming their audience and just spreading terrible lies and garbage and hoaxes. Which I guess kind of brings us to the next story, because, you know, again, all the freaking out in America over trans people, the deep state, Democrats are actually baby eating satanic people, and like all this other unhinged nonsense, right? Well, some people have some thoughts on that, but also why, outside of an American-centric lens, significant progress is being made for LGBTQ plus people around the world, and in also a pretty significant way recently. As the American right continues its freakout over trans people existing, you probably missed the news that the World Health Organization just totally depathologized LGBTQ plus people in its own diagnostic manual that every country in the world uses as a reference. We are winning. The WHO's new ICD-11, effective 1st of January 2022, removed gender identity disorder and ego-dystonic sexual orientation from its official list of mental disorders. This manual will shape global psychiatric policy towards LGBTQ plus people for decades to come. We will win. It's easy to get caught in a US/Eurocentric mindset, but this move by the WHO and the Indian Supreme Court's ruling in Navtej Singh Johar versus Union 2018 and National Legal Services Authority versus Union 2014 are easily the 3 biggest leaps in global LGBTQ plus rights in your lifetime. Yeah, that is not insignificant, and I know people will like, right-wing people will complain, see, that's the UN and the big evil World Economic Forum and the deep state, and they're all going to create a one world government. Like, no. But one of the things that the UN does that everyone agrees, at least everyone in power who deals with business, regulations, bureaucracy, agrees is a good thing, is to try and create consensus for doing things internationally to smooth over the process, right? That's why it's basically the same kind of flight safety regulations around the world, the same set of standards around the world, right? Like, this is all relatively helpful to help people communicate, trade, and move around the planet freely. It helps, you know, ostensibly it's in the service of capitalism, right? The money and the goods must flow, so we got to make that easier. So that's like the kind of main purpose of the UN in that regard, but it also just helps so that people don't have to spend time being like, okay, wait, do these regulations apply in this area? What? I don't, and then it just becomes a bureaucratic nightmare, right? The UN tries to do stuff to eliminate segments of that within reason, because again, not everyone has to listen to the UN, as we are all very much aware. But the fact that now the official UN handbook on psychiatric orders and disorders has basically depathologized trans people and anyone who's in the LGBTQ plus community, that is huge, because that is now the baseline manual. And again, not saying that everyone has to listen to it. I'm not expecting, say, for example, actually, no, I'm not even going to list certain nations, but we all know the ones, right, that aren't exactly friendly towards people in the Rainbow Nation. So yeah, not exactly expecting them to suddenly do a 180 on their positions, but the baseline of this that is going to be applied around the world, from the west to the east to the north to the south, across Latin America, Africa, Asia Pacific, like every corner of the globe now is going to have a baseline manual that has a significant major update that is a positive one for the LGBTQ plus community. So yes, I know we're all kind of understandably lost in the sauce of all the terribleness happening in America and also on Turf Island, like, let's be real here. But there is progress still being made. Take that energy, take that, motivation, and continue to fight the good fight here. Am I right, comrades? And speaking of comrades doing awesome good work fighting and winning, Parkdale tenants beat rent-eviction. Tenants at 12 Lansdowne have received confirmation that their landlord has withdrawn all eviction notices against them. Parkdale is a neighborhood just kind of west of downtown Toronto. Very working class, there's some poverty there as well. Also, it's basically the home of Little Tibet, so you can get amazing momos there for those who are maybe going to go to Toronto or who live there. And like with many Toronto neighborhoods, it's obviously being gentrified right now, but local residents have been organizing to fight back against that. And that happened right here with this small apartment complex on 12 Lansdowne, and they won. They're going to be evicted. They organized. They even took it to court, I think, and they beat their landlord. So I know the situation seems really dire right now with, all like the terribleness and people being evicted and unaffordable rents. And of course, rent evictions, which is what happened here, right? They're like, oh, we gotta evict you people so that we can renovate your apartments, and then no doubt turn them into like Airbnbs, or to like, oh, it's so swanky now, so now you gotta pay like $5,000 a month for it. It's like terribleness like that, right? But it shows that even in a single building, if you can organize with your fellow tenants, with your neighbors across the hall, above you, below you, if you can organize, you can absolutely get big, meaningful wins and fight back against a brutal capitalist system, and you can win. It's possible, people. And that brings us to our next story about another pretty big win for the people in Mexico. With 298 votes in favor, 0 against, 197 abstentions, and an opposition walkout, Mexico's House of Deputies votes to nationalize the nation's lithium stores. The bill heads to the Senate where, barring an Elon Musk-funded hit squad, it is certain to pass. And we have a fantastic update to this story. Mexico nationalizes lithium mining. Mexico has officially nationalized its lithium industry after the Senate approved by 87 votes in favor, 20 against, and 16 abstentions the mining reform proposed by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, which gives the state exclusive rights over the battery metal. So maybe the reason why Elon Musk wanted to buy Twitter is because he was really salty about Mexico nationalizing its lithium stores. Maybe that's why he wanted to buy Twitter. So, yeah, we do have to kind of be nervous about this, because no doubt American capital is being like, no, we can't have Mexican energy independence. We already saw them complaining about that in a previous video of mine where we talked about Mexico basically developing its own and nationalizing a bit more of its own petroleum industry. And America didn't like that too much. So we should be a little worried here in terms of what may happen in the near future. But again, a positive win for the people of Mexico, kind of safeguarding more of their future and their investments in what's going to be a growing, further developed world and society that relies on precious metals like this to make all our tech gadgets go. And one of our early stories was about Amazon, but then near the end of the month, there was another story about Amazon that I didn't see a lot of people talking about. So, in case people missed it, on April 30th, Minnesota Amazon workers walked out. They're demanding that Amazon bring back wage increases, give time off for the upcoming Muslim holiday of Eid, the end of Ramadan. Here's what Tyler Hamilton, a current Amazon worker, told the crowd.
$3 an hour, right? Yeah. You know why else we're here? Say low. Unlimited VTO for Eid. You know what they've done in years past? Eid, for those of you who don't know, it's a Muslim holiday like Christmas. Yeah. Imagine if you worked on Christmas and Amazon forced you to. You couldn't see your families. You couldn't spend time with them. That'd be ridiculous. No one would like that. Amazon is doing that with Eid right now. And they get away with it. Just like they got away with lowering our pay when the cost of housing goes up, when the cost of food goes up. For a while, you all saw the gas prices. Thank goodness they've gone down a little bit. But prices for housing and food, do you see your rent going down? No! I have never had my rent go down, ever. I've been here almost 5 years now. I've been in Stowe, I've been in Pitt, I've been a trainer, I've done everything that I have in my part of the building. Every single year I've been here, if you look at the pay and the compensation adjusted for inflation, every single year it's gone down. They've never included adjustments for inflation. And look at inflation this year. We need this $3 an hour.
And there's a few more videos and like a bit more to the story. Again, I will link all that down below. Sources for everything that we've talked about today are going to be in the description down below for your enjoyment or displeasure, depending at your leisure. But this was a really significant development that I didn't see a lot of people talk about. Maybe it's because, you know, most of the workers were brown and Muslim, like that would not surprise me. Or maybe it's because in the wake of the other earlier Amazon victory, people didn't want to report on that to maybe see they're like, oh, you know what? Further wins and victories are possible, and we should actually start actions in solidarity with our fellow Amazon workers in other parts of the country, nay, around the globe, perchance. So this was a really good thing to see. I don't know how successful it ultimately was. I haven't seen and heard much updates to this, but if someone has an update, please share it down below. But this was still really great to see in terms of solidarity from all people working at Amazon in Minnesota who decided, no, you know what, this is blatantly unfair and it needs to stop. That's the kind of working class awareness that I absolutely love to see. These workers recognize their own self-worth and the value of their labor, and they took a stand for what they believe in. So solidarity with the Minnesota Amazon workers. I hope they win, and here's to hopefully many more victories with the workers at Amazon facilities around the country and around the world. And then our final story to cap off the month of April. We once again return to California with some news that I basically didn't see anywhere, and it's honestly so great. California just shy of 100% powered by renewables for first time. Yeah, on the last day of April, they, checked the numbers and everything, found out where it was coming from, made some adjustments, and something like 98% of all of California's energy needs were met by renewables. It's the closest it's ever gotten. Here's to that happening more and more. But at the same time, that's a state with more people than there are in all of Canada, the nation that I call home. And they powered that entire state nearly entirely on renewables. Yeah, there's still a climate crisis happening, and a lot of us aren't doing what needs to be done in terms of making our politicians actually become accountable for their actions, or their inactions rather. But this is still really great to see. It is such a good, positive step in the right direction. It shows that there are changes being made, people who care about this, some places that are taking this seriously. So, I know we shouldn't say, baby steps. We need kind of more than baby steps right now, but still a massive positive development to cap off a month that I know is very rough in a lot of ways. But look at all those good news stories. That's like, what, 15, maybe like 16 or so stories, all basically showing that there were some pretty significant wins for people throughout the month of April. Now, yes, some of them were mocking, like we mocked Donald Trump and we mocked Alex Jones a little bit, but, generally speaking, there's at least then over a dozen stories about positive stories of unionization, terrible legislation being defeated, good legislation being passed, the renewables actually happening, nationalized lithium stores, tenants actually winning against their landlord and successfully fighting back against rent eviction, the depathologizing of LGBTQ plus people internationally by the UN and also even in India. Like, this is good stuff here, right? there was a good amount of good news from April. And sure, some of it I know people are familiar with, probably most of all the Amazon union win and Alex Jones and Infowars being sued and having to declare bankruptcy. But here were other stories from, around the world, right? So I hope people are feeling kind of re-energized and feeling a bit better about the situation now in the wake of all these stories, which unfortunately a lot of people maybe didn't even hear about. Please let me know, again, in the comment section down below, if you have your own good news stories to share that I didn't cover, that someone else didn't cover, some kind of union victory or positive development, people fighting back against landlords or something. If you have more good news from April or right now, yeah, share it. Do that good uplifting, like energize your fellow comrades, right? But it's such a shame that, unfortunately, a lot of this stuff people didn't know about or hear about. And it's probably because the media wants to keep it silent. And it's also just because, unfortunately, we are just leading such busy lives that we may not find out about it. A lot of these I found out from tweets on Twitter, rather than say, my news radio, a newspaper, a news media site. I had to find this out from people who are actually doing the good work on Twitter. So that's kind of a problem with the media and all that. But I just really wanted to make sure that given all the terribleness happening right now, right, with Roe v. Wade, trans kids are still being targeted all over the place. Like, it is not a good situation right now. And so I know people have definitely taken the proverbial hit from these stories and these developments, but that's not to say that we're all down and out, right? There were victories to be found. So I hope this motivates people and energizes them for the upcoming fight of a lifetime with regards to Roe v. Wade and basic human rights, which unfortunately is a thing we still have to worry about in 2022. And that's what's bothering me today.